They put missing children on milk cartons at breakfast. Then they let you leave the house and disappear until dinner. No phone, no GPS, no way to be reached. And somehow that was considered normal. If you were born between 1973 and 1980, you grew up in one of the strangest transitions in modern history. You were old enough to remember life before the internet, but young enough to watch the entire world change around you. You learned how to use a rotary phone before you learned how to use a smartphone. You played outside without supervision. You survived economic crashes, cultural shifts, and technological revolutions. And psychology says experiences like these don't just create memories, they shape the way people think. Because many younger Gen X adults share psychological patterns that are surprisingly different from both older generations and younger ones. Patterns that affect how they trust, work, solve problems, handle stress, and even relate to other people. And if you were born between 1973 and 1980, one of these patterns might explain more about your life than you realize. Most generations are shaped by the world they inherit. Younger Gen X was shaped by the world disappearing beneath their feet and being replaced by another one. You grew up in an analog childhood, but built your adult life in a digital world. You learned independence before connectivity, patience before convenience, privacy before oversharing, and uncertainty before certainty. This created a generation that often feels different without fully understanding why. People sometimes call younger Gen X skeptical, detached, private, overly independent, or hard to impress. But what if those traits aren't personality flaws? What if they're psychological adaptations? Because the environment you grow up in becomes the lens through which you interpret the world. And younger Gen X grew up in an environment unlike any generation before or after. The first reason younger Gen X thinks differently is that they learned self-reliance before they learned connection. Many younger Gen X kids came home to empty houses. Nobody checked every move. Nobody tracked their location. Nobody texted asking where they were. Psychology calls this early self-reliance, when help isn't immediately available. The brain learns an important lesson. Figure it out yourself. This creates adults who are incredibly resourceful, but it also creates people who often struggle to ask for help. Not because they don't need it, but because their default setting has always been, I'll handle it. The second reason is that they trust experience more than authority. Younger Gen X grew up during a period when institutions started losing their unquestioned credibility. They saw scandals, broken promises, economic instability, and conflicting information. Over time, many developed a psychological habit. Trust what works, not what you're told. This is why many younger Gen X adults appear skeptical. They're not automatically cynical. They simply learned that authority and truth aren't always the same thing. The third reason is that they grew up between two worlds. Few generations have experienced a technological shift this dramatic. You remember maps, payphones, video stores, and paper applications, but you also adapted to smartphones, social media, and digital life. Psychologically, this created cognitive flexibility. You can operate in old systems and new systems, but it also creates a feeling younger generations rarely understand. You remember a world that no longer exists. The fourth reason is that they value privacy differently. Many younger Gen X adults find modern oversharing uncomfortable, not because they're secretive, but because they were raised in a culture where privacy was normal. Your thoughts stayed inside your head. Your mistakes weren't permanently documented online. Your embarrassing moments disappeared instead of living forever on the internet. Today's world rewards visibility, but younger Gen X was shaped by invisibility, and that changes how people relate to attention. The fifth reason is that they expect life to change without warning. Many major events hit this generation at critical moments. Market crashes, industry shifts, political changes, and technological disruption repeatedly delivered the same lesson. Nothing stays stable forever. Psychology shows that repeated uncertainty often creates adaptability. Younger Gen X became rebuilders. When things fall apart, they don't panic as quickly because they've rebuilt before. The sixth reason is that they solve problems instead of talking about them. One common younger Gen X trait is practical thinking. When something breaks, they often want solutions first and discussions second. This doesn't mean they're unemotional. It means they were rewarded for competence. Their identity became tied to being capable. The person who fixes things, the person who figures it out, the person who handles it. The seventh reason is that they are quietly exhausted. This may be the pattern nobody talks about. Many younger Gen X adults are now caring for children, careers, relationships, and aging parents at the same time. They've been responsible for so long that responsibility feels normal. But psychology says carrying everything for everyone eventually creates invisible fatigue. The strange thing is that many don't complain because they learned long ago that complaining rarely changed anything. One thing many younger Gen X adults also have in common is that they rarely believe good news immediately. When something sounds too easy, too perfect, or too certain, a small voice inside often asks, "What's the catch?" To younger generations, this can look pessimistic, but psychology suggests something different. Younger Gen X spent decades watching certainty disappear. Careers changed overnight, companies vanished, entire industries transformed over time. The brain learned a powerful lesson. Prepare for change even when things seem stable. This isn't negativity, it's pattern recognition. Another reason younger Gen X thinks differently is that they were forced to become adaptable. Many people think resilience comes from motivation, but resilience often comes from necessity. Younger Gen X didn't grow up with endless tutorials, online communities, and instant answers. When something went wrong, they had to improvise. Try again. Psychology shows that repeated problem solving builds a mindset called adaptive confidence. Not confidence that says, I know everything, but confidence that says, I'll figure it out. That's a very different kind of strength. Many younger Gen X adults also feel caught between generations. Older generations sometimes see them as too modern. Younger generations sometimes see them as too old-fashioned. They remember life before digital dependence. Yet they fully participated in the digital revolution. They understand both worlds but don't completely belong to either. Psychologically, this creates a unique identity, the bridge generation. The people translating between two realities. Sometimes that creates wisdom. Sometimes it creates loneliness, because being between worlds can feel like belonging nowhere. And perhaps the most overlooked pattern of all is that many younger Gen X adults don't always know how tired they are. They've spent so much of life being responsible that responsibility no longer feels heavy. It simply feels normal. They handle problems, manage crises, support others, and keep moving. Psychologists sometimes call this functional exhaustion. You're still performing, still showing up, still solving problems. But internally, you've been running on reserves for years. The challenge isn't that they can't handle pressure. The challenge is that they often don't realize how much pressure they've been carrying. If there is one hidden strength that defines younger Gen X, it may be this: they know how to continue. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, not without scars, but consistently. They learned how to adapt, how to rebuild, how to survive uncertainty, and how to function when there was no clear roadmap. In a world obsessed with confidence, visibility, and attention, that kind of quiet endurance is easy to overlook. But psychology suggests it may be one of the most valuable strengths a person can have. Maybe that's why younger Gen X thinks differently. Not because they're better, not because they're worse, but because they were shaped by a rare combination of freedom, uncertainty, independence, and change. The freedom taught independence. The uncertainty taught adaptability. The lack of supervision taught self-reliance. The rapid changes taught flexibility. And all of those lessons still live inside the way they think today. If you were born between 1973 and 1980, your childhood wasn't just a collection of memories, it was training. Maybe that's why you've always felt a little different. Not because something is wrong with you, not because you're stuck in the past, but because you were shaped by a world that no longer exists. And people shaped by disappearing worlds often see things that others don't. So if you were born between 1973 and 1980, tell us your birth year below. And what shaped you more, the freedom, the responsibility, or the constant change?